Well, greetings, imagination connoisseurs. Once again, welcome to Robservations, the show about something. I'm the Viceroy of Verisimilitude, the Master of Fun and Wonder, the existential Mr. Rogers, Mr. Robert Meyer Burnett, and this is Robservations number 263, by God. And of course, these live chats are brought to you by Lucky Tiger Men's Grooming Products, for those men who want to look good and feel great. And if you go visit their website at getluckytiger.com and you use the letters PGS for Post-Geek Singularity, when you check out, you get 20% off your order. And allow me to welcome you, all of you imagination connoisseurs, all of you members that make up the great Post-Geek Singularity community we are building here at the Burnettwork and Robservations. So welcome to you guys. Now, I'll tell you, I got to tell you, I mean, I've been spouting off on the internet pretty regularly since April of 2015. And I can't believe that it's been that long, but it has been that long. And there are just some days, I mean, we don't even talk about politics, but when entertainment news like this keeps dropping, wow. So, of course, yesterday we heard the bombshell. I'm sure a lot of people were clapping in certain quarters of the internet, certain fan quarters, as it were, that Weiss and Benioff, the creators of the Game of Thrones television series, who also had signed on to create a Star Wars trilogy, a trilogy of Star Wars films, left. They bailed yesterday. A lot of people have been talking about it. They do have a very sweet Netflix deal. And I look, my feelings on that are, there's a lot going on with Star Wars right now. We've got the impending, we're less than 2 weeks away from the release of, about 2 weeks away, the release of The Mandalorian, the first episode of The Mandalorian. A new trailer dropped yesterday. I dug the vibe of the Mandalorian trailer. I'm very excited about it. In my mind, that's the real Star Wars excitement. As I detailed the 7 weeks of Star Wars that we're getting, beginning on the 12th of November, running all the way through December 27th. It's a pretty exciting time to be a Star Wars fan. We're getting 8 episodes, 8 hours of The Mandalorian at $15 million an hour. And then we are, of course, getting The Rise of Skywalker. And for those who aren't paying attention, we get the 7th episode of Mandalorian on the Friday preceding The Rise of Skywalker on Friday, December 20th. And then the 8th episode and the final episode of the first season of The Mandalorian drops on the 27th of December. So there's a lot of holiday goodness coming your way if you're a Star Wars fan, which I think we all are, and I'm excited about it. Now, why did Weiss and Benioff leave? Well, everybody else has been talking about it. I think, to be honest, they had a Netflix deal. You know, walking away from Star Wars was pretty tough, but you know what? There was no way to win for them. It doesn't matter what they did. Of course, people are saying, well, you know, on the heels of this, they were at a convention last weekend and they were talking about how they didn't have any idea what was going on. I think they were sort of capitulating in a way. It's weird to hear people say they don't have any idea. I mean, Benioff himself is a novelist and a screenwriter. It's not like he doesn't know how to write or understand characters. I think I didn't actually hear the comments myself, so I can't judge from their body language or their tone what they meant. But I do think that they have a very lucrative Netflix deal. And that lucrative Netflix deal, they can go create something new from whole cloth. And I think any creator, as much as, look, I would love to work. I'd be happy as a clam, whatever that actually means. I'd be happy as a clam working on Star Wars or Star Trek or something like that, a previously existing franchise, because I love them, especially Star Trek. But if you're a creator, if you're a writer, you want to create your own things. It's always better to create your own sandbox rather than playing someone else's. And the way online vitriol works now, it's a zero-sum game, I think, for anyone. Yeah, you can get the money, but can you imagine if you're Weiss and Benioff, you're already being pilloried for something you haven't even made yet. So, and look at all the glee and the singing and from all parts of the internet. I just have to say this about Weiss and Benioff. Whether you like the last 2 seasons of Game of Thrones or not, it ran 8 seasons. And by any stretch, by any metric, Game of Thrones was an extraordinary television series. And yes, it was based on George R.R. Martin's novels. And absolutely, George R.R. Martin's novels were very difficult to adapt, and they rose to the challenge. Now, what's really interesting is, for anybody who's paying attention to the history of Game of Thrones had a first pilot that was made that was, by all accounts, a disaster. It didn't work. Weiss and Benioff have said, we didn't know what we were doing, and it was a disaster. So, like Star Trek, like the original Star Trek, The Cage was not a disaster. It was too smart for its own good. And the story goes that the network found that it was too cerebral, so they commissioned a second pilot. That doesn't happen a lot in television history. So Game of Thrones, they made another pilot. They didn't scrap it. They made another pilot. Somebody somewhere saw some value, and maybe if we get the full box set of the Game of Thrones series, I don't know if I'm actually interested in buying it, but if I did, maybe there's more documentary material that'll delve into that first pilot and what some of the real reasons were that the first Game of Thrones pilot was jettisoned, and they went and made a new pilot. I'm always interested in that kind of thinking. You're throwing good money after bad, but unless you see something that, oh, okay, well, maybe there's something here, and Game of Thrones was made. And, we all forget. I mean, I understand you can't stick the landing. It kind of tarnishes the entire story as a whole. I get that, and I do agree with that sentiment. However, Game of Thrones did provide all of us with a lot of happiness for a long time. And it was, in fact, a great TV show. I might not have liked the way it ended. I thought it was pretty much an audience betrayal. But I did enjoy the journey to get there. Which brings me to the news that dropped. I'm going to read this Hollywood Reporter story. It went up at 11:58 a.m., which literally was a little over 90 minutes ago, 90 minutes before I was going live. I was working this morning. I was working on the Netflix show. So that's why I couldn't be on John Campia's show today. But we finished what we needed to do in the morning and had a little lunchy lunch, little drinky poo, some water here. And I found this. As people know, HBO has been making 2 Game of Thrones prequel shows. They had 4 ideas commissioned. They went forward with one. They actually shot the pilot in Ireland over the summer, and it's been in post, and we don't know the name of it. But today, Naomi Watts starred today at 11:58 a.m. This article dropped, and this article says it's by Joss Wigler and Leslie Goldberg. Game of Thrones, Naomi Watts led prequel dead at HBO. Jane Goldman, who worked on X-Men and also the Kingsman series. Jane Goldman's pilot was filmed over the summer and will not be moving forward. The untitled Game of Thrones prequel from Jane Goldman is not moving forward at HBO. Said to focus on the Age of Heroes and the first ever battle between Man and White Walker, Goldman's prequel, which had filmed a pilot over the summer, will not be advancing to series, the Hollywood Reporter has confirmed. According to sources, Goldman emailed the cast to share the news. HBO, as it typically does on projects in development, declined to comment. The news comes shortly after word of HBO nearing a deal to produce a second pilot based in the world of Game of Thrones from the minds of authors George R.R. Martin and Ryan J. Condal. The series is said to focus on the reign of Targaryen kings in the lead up to the events of Game of Thrones, aligning the vision of the project much more closely to the days of Jon Snow and Daenerys Targaryen than the now scrapped Naomi Watts starring prequel, though still quite a bit earlier than the events of the Emmy-winning HBO series, which wrapped its final season in the spring of 2020. Which wrapped its final season in the spring of 2019, not 2020, but it does say it's a misprint here. Following the series finale in May, the Hollywood Reporter spoke to HBO's Casey Bloys for an update on timing for the next iteration of the Thrones franchise. His response at the time: "We're shooting the pilot in June. You can do the math and figure out when it would be on the air. What I'm not doing is working backwards by saying this has to be on the air by this date. We want to do the best show possible. This is a pilot, so we're doing it the old-fashioned way, which is shooting a pilot. My expectation is it will be great and we'll move forward and it'll move along on a regular TV timetable. I don't want to speculate any dates." Featuring a sprawling cast, including Naomi Watts, Miranda Richardson, Joshua Whitehouse, Marquis Rodriguez, and more, Goldman's untitled Game of Thrones prequel was said to take place during the Age of Heroes, thousands of years before the events in Thrones. And in this period of Westeros' history, the Seven Kingdoms weren't even a twinkle in the eye as the continent was separated into dozens of their own kingdoms. It was an age dominated by heroic figures like Bran the Builder, credited with creating the Wall, and Lan the Clever, credited with founding House Lannister. HBO's logline added, "Only one thing is for sure. From the horrifying secrets of Westeros' history to the true origin of the White Walkers, the mysteries of the East to the Starks of legend, it's not the story we think we know." That HBO would pass on this Game of Thrones prequel comes as a shocker, but not totally out of the blue. The original pilot for what would become the premium cable network's biggest hit ever was originally reshot, recast, and redeveloped. Sources say HBO wasn't thrilled with the final cut of the Watts-led pilot and asked for changes in the edits before scrapping the entire thing. Still, expanding the world of Game of Thrones remains a top priority for the cable network, which is under new parent company Warner Media, formerly AT&T. This is the first time HBO has ever revisited one of its scripted originals, announced before its Deadwood movie, which provided a proper ending for the beloved series, and the upcoming Sopranos feature film, which is also a prequel. Game of Thrones is a global mega hit and a huge revenue driver for the Casey Bloys-led cabler. The franchise is worth billions, with foreign sales and merchandising factored in. HBO, for its part, has been on an aggressive buying spree as it looks to compete with billion-dollar streaming competitors from the likes of Netflix, Amazon, Hulu, and the upcoming Apple, among others. The Game of Thrones library will be a key asset for Warner Media's own arrival into the streaming wars, with HBO Max expected to launch in April. The pilot pass arrives a day after Game of Thrones showrunners David Benioff and Dan Weiss walked away from a planned trilogy of Star Wars films. The duo, who will be credited as exec producers on anything Game of Thrones related at HBO, departed their overall deal with the premium outlet, Netflix, for a 5-year, $250 million film and TV pack with Netflix. So there you have it, ladies and gentlemen. Weiss and Benioff, they left Star Wars one day and they lost out on being the EPs, which means they get a healthy paycheck for every episode for this new Game of Thrones series. What does it all mean? What does it all mean? Well, not much in the grand scheme of things, really. This happens all the time. We just don't hear it on such high-profile projects one day after another. Look, if I had to guess, and I really don't know anybody, any of the players involved. I've had no conversations. I've known that there have been people that knew the Game of Thrones pilot was not moving forward. And having pilots not move forward is not anything unusual. There are many pilots on networks every year that don't move forward. They might make, I don't know, if a network made, let's say they made 15 shows. You're lucky if 5 of them go forward. I mean, even remember when Amazon was doing that deal when they would make like 5 or 10 of their pilots and you'd pick 2 or however that worked. So it's not unusual for a pilot to be rejected by the network. And nowadays I can't even imagine how new television shows work and much less stay on the air. I mean, my buddy Mark Altman, who I made Free Enterprise with, his series Pandora got picked up for a second season by the CW. And a friend of Gabe Bologna, one of his childhood friends, Jason Richmond, just had his show Stumptown, a new ABC show that's based on a graphic novel, picked up for its back order for a full season. People are liking Stumptown and Colby Smulders, which is good. I always like knowing people that are successful. That's always a good thing. But why did this happen? I think ultimately that the Game of Thrones prequel probably just they wanted it to work and they probably had the best people they could involved, but sometimes things just don't work out. I don't see, I mean, it seems dead. They're not going to reshoot it like the original Thrones. I think if I had to hazard a guess, it sounded pretty good on paper when you say that, oh, this show is going to take place thousands of years before the original Game of Thrones. But when you actually see it thousands of years before Game of Thrones, think about how far back, if we go back 1,000 years or 2,000 years or thousands, maybe 3 or 4,000 years, how different life was back then to the way it is now. But I'll bet the show probably looked pretty similar to Game of Thrones. I'm sure there was actual conceptual problems that they were not able to surmount. Maybe production issues. I heard production issues came up in Ireland. I don't know exactly. I can't speak to that. But there are a number of reasons. There's usually nothing nefarious behind it. Things just don't work out the way you want. Making movies, I've always said, is alchemy. Great movies and great television. There is an element of magical pixie dust that is sprinkled across these projects to make them work as well as they do. And again, you're trying to make up this stuff out of whole cloth. It's hard. It's a really hard thing to do. But I think it's interesting. You know, HBO does have a series in the wings waiting. So they were smart. They were developing 4 ideas. They're moving forward with another one that is actually created by George R.R. Martin himself, co-created by, which to me seems more, you know, here's something I want to reiterate. Fans want to believe that all of the chatter online actually causes stuff to change. Look, nobody in the industry is looking at the final season of Game of Thrones and saying that Weiss and Benioff are somehow hacks who couldn't get anything done, because they did get something done. They got Game of Thrones done. Now, we might not have liked the final season. I certainly didn't. There are other people that did. But the fact is, it won Emmy Awards and the viewership was high. So by any metric that matters to anybody who's working at a studio or a network, that was a winning metric. It absolutely was a good thing. Now, we as fans have to understand that these things that we complain and bitch and moan about, Star Trek, Star Wars, all of that, the perception within the hallowed halls of the company that are making these things is very different. You know, it's very different. And a lot of the time, we as fans, I think one of our biggest shortcomings is we're not considering the business aspects of it because we're not aware of them. We're aware of how these things hit us as viewers. And that's, no matter how much you read about the entertainment business, it's not always the case when you're coming at it from any fan perspective without any kind of understanding about the business, how this stuff works. And there are very complex, there's a multitude of reasons why things work and why they don't work. And do I believe that everyone's like, oh, it's just a smokescreen? Weiss and Benioff left Star Wars because, no, I think it wasn't a smokescreen at all. I think they finally just, they knew that who are they going to please? Why don't we go? It's much safer for us, because if they were to look, creating a Star Wars, I can't imagine what it's like to create a Star Wars trilogy out of whole cloth. Actually, I could, because I'd go back and read some of the books and probably lean heavily on them. But, you know, that's not what Weiss and Benioff are expected to do. They're not expected to go like, oh, we'd like to go back to the EU books and do a Knights of the Old Republic show. That's not what they're being paid for. So I think in a way, maybe it's different, but I think they could excuse themselves. They could leave, and in a way, everyone's like, yay, they're leaving. It's amazing to me. It's amazing to me that Weiss and Benioff, who brought us 8 seasons of Game of Thrones, are now hated. What about seasons 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6? And I know 7 or 8 are truncated, which I'll not understand, but what about all the great TV they already brought you? Does that not count for something? Should you not admire what they were able to do? Why do we turn on them? I mean, they gave us great entertainment, didn't they? For years. And it seems to me I would wish them nothing but the best. They regardless of what you thought of the final season or the final 2 seasons, they still provided monumentally entertaining television that was staggeringly produced and so well done. and they put those actors together, those effects people, the directors. By any stretch of the imagination, Game of Thrones is an epic win in the annals of television history, and they should be respected for that. They should be. And extricating themselves out of a situation, if they had the foresight to see the writing on the wall, maybe they did the best thing they thought. And of course, they do have that great, very lucrative, I mean, $250 million deal with Netflix. Yeah, I think I'd go and try and create my own new stuff than put up with anything else. But you never know. But the Game of Thrones, the today's news, that was yesterday's news. Today's news, I really do think that what happened with the Game of Thrones TV series is, look, you've got huge shoes to fill. Huge shoes. And normally a TV series out of the gate doesn't necessarily have to be a 10 or an 11. Maybe if you had an 8 or even a 7.5, you might be able to get a show on the air. But this show, whatever this Game of Thrones prequel was, the bar was set so high, maybe unrealistically so, that if the earth doesn't move for you, if the show doesn't make you feel like you just rub one out, I guess, then maybe the executives just felt that it never will, or for whatever reason, it's a bummer, but it is not happening, and they're being, at least in the reports today, being very definitive. And I would say that if anything, it also it has something to say about where we're at in terms of the streaming services. Like, we have seen Apple's new shows, whether it's the morning show, whether it's For All Mankind that I want to see, these shows are not getting the kind of reviews that I think Apple would have liked them to get. No, they're not 10 out of 10s. They're not getting that kind of attention. There's a lot of, and look, these shows are going to be scrutinized more than any other shows because the amount of money that's being spent on them and what they mean. Launch shows for a brand new streaming service like Apple, the pedigree of the showrunners, the pedigree of the actors. I mean, they're going A-list all the way, especially on the morning show. It's all feature actors or cable actor. Reese Witherspoon was a feature star. Now she's back to HBO, but still she's a producer now. And the talent they've assembled is terrific. But, we shall see. It's going to shake out. All of these streaming services, like we've said before, they're all going after top-tier talent, which is good. But top-tier talent, especially when you're talking about actors, it doesn't necessarily guarantee you a home run. It's interesting because the morning show, is that something people want to see? Is that something that's really compelling for people to watch? I don't know. Somebody thought it was a good idea, but it's not. Of course, to me, it seems a little 2012, maybe. I don't know. I'm interested to see the show only because of the talent involved. But again, we're going to see a lot of this happening. There's going to be a lot of these new streaming services are going to front load their service. I mean, I think Disney with The Mandalorian, probably the smartest. You can't go any bigger than leading with Star Wars. You really can't. You'd think Star Trek would have been the same thing, but Star Trek, and I'll freely admit this, does not have nearly the power to get people excited. Star Trek has an aging fan base, and it's always been limited. But Star Wars has a much bigger fan base. So leading Disney Plus with The Mandalorian, you couldn't have done better. And Disney Plus is going to be Bob Iger's big legacy with the company before he leaves. And he's a very smart man, and he's making sure it's going to happen. But everything is shaken out. There's all kinds of things. Remember, HBO is becoming HBO Max, which is going to be Warner's streaming service. So they too, I'm sure they really wanted to have a Game of Thrones show ready to go at launch. And you think that they made this decision lightly? They did not. They wanted to have this Game of Thrones series ready to go, maybe to lead the charge. So it's a blow for them, no doubt. But, they've got the original creator of GOT coming back in George R.R. Martin, and I'm sure they're going to be okay. HBO is doing quite well. I mean, heck, I'm really looking forward to his Dark Materials series. My God, what a great series of books that was not well served with the Golden Compass. But to see a faithful adaptation of that, HBO's killing it. Their finale of The Deuce, even in the wake of Game of Thrones, they've now got Watchmen, which What a wacky show that's turning out to be, but okay. Uh, anyway, what do you think? Let's see what people think today. I got letters, ladies and gentlemen. I do have letters. So it is the 29th. Emil Johansson is here. Does having a good idea get you anywhere? Emil asks. No. I have great ideas all the time, every day. But like with anybody, a good idea is not enough. You have to work a good idea and turn it into something that's saleable. In terms of Hollywood, you can't even go into pitch meetings anymore and just pitch ideas. Usually you have to take now audio visuals. You have to make what's called a mood book. A lot of directors make mood books. They go in to pitch a project, and what a mood book is it's literally a book. It's either it could be a slide a PowerPoint presentation on a computer. But I like to actually I have one right here. I can't show it, but I do. I've got a mood book, and for a series idea that I have. And what a mood book is you put pictures, or you either take pictures or you use other things from other movies or television shows, and you put together a book that sells your idea. So somebody can hold it in their hands, they can look at images and go, oh yeah, I see where you're going with this. I have my friend Michael Davis, who directed Shoot 'Em Up, the movie Shoot 'Em Up, and he's soon to release Michael Davis has been working for the last 5 years on it. He's single-handedly animated like a whole animated series. It's unbelievable. And I hope to have him on the show to talk about it. But he would do very elaborate pitch presentations where he did something where he could go in and take this idea. He once did a presentation for a show called Pulp, where he had these giant boards. They were like 8 feet tall of images, and they all locked together, and they had all the characters' stories intertwined for the first season. It was the most amazing pitch I'd ever seen, and I think it was a little too intimidating. But that's what you have to do. If you want to sell an idea in Hollywood, you have to refine it before you can walk it in. You always have a better chance the more refined it is, and that can take a long time. Madouine says, I wonder, did Benioff and Weiss pull out of their Star Wars deal on their own for legitimate business reasons, or is this a cold feet, knee-jerk reaction by Kennedy and Iger because of how poorly Game of Thrones ended? Well, here's the thing. Game of Thrones no one was judging Weiss and Benioff by if someone didn't like the 8th season of Game of Thrones. A lot of people did like the 8th season, and they've certainly got the full-on, you've got all of, 72 episodes total or something. That's a lot of TV to look at, and they won a lot of Emmys, and it was groundbreaking television. So no, no one, look, fans bitch and moan and complain all they want about Game of Thrones. What Disney looks at is, what was the viewership? It was enormous. It was through the roof. How much money was HBO making? Subscriptions, all of those things. People aren't usually, they're looking at the reception, how fans don't matter. All of this cacophony of bitching and moaning and complaining on the internet, it really doesn't affect necessarily the bottom line, because we're all going. We're all watching. I know people are going to be like, Rob, I'm not going to go see The Last Jedi. No, you eventually will. I guarantee you. Or The Rise of Skywalker. You're going to go see Rise of Skywalker. You're going to watch The Mandalorian. Eventually you will. Fans do not understand. And we bitch and moan and complain and speculate all the time. And I am a fan. Believe me, I'm a fan. But I don't think that it had anything to do with that. I think, if anything, Disney is they are in a massive look. Regardless of what rumors you want to believe, Rise of Skywalker is being tweaked up until the last minute. If they're actually doing reshoots, I can't say right now. I mean, if I knew, I would tell you. But I know that they were doing reshoots. I know they were making use of the Mandalorian technology because they can. And any filmmaker worth his salt on a movie this important, or her salt, you push it until the last minute. Now they're getting there. They're getting there. You're within 2 months of release date. You're getting it's getting close, because remember, when you're 2 months out of release date, you have to have dubbing done. Like literally, they dub the movie into different languages. That has to be subtitled. It has to be ready to go out. You can't just like drop a movie on the world a couple of days before. So 2 months out, You're running out of time. But I'm willing to bet you $100 million that J.J. Abrams has found out when's my drop dead date. Nobody has pushed their drop dead dates more than Peter Jackson did on the Lord of the Rings movies. Nobody. And because he controlled the pipeline, he could get away with it. But man, if you haven't watched these special features on the Lord of the Rings discs, check them out. But yeah, they're pushing it, man. They're pushing the Rise of Skywalker as far as they can go. But Disney's in a position with The Mandalorian coming out. I mean, think about it. Between how much The Mandalorian cost, the launch of Disney Plus using Star Wars at the forefront, the charge of the Light Brigade, the charge of the Space Horses is being led by The Mandalorian. And think about it. Mandalorian is 8 times 15, that's a pretty big, it's not quite $150 million, but including marketing, it's a big investment, big investment. At the same time, they're also releasing what is probably going to wind up being the most expensive Star Wars movie ever made. God only knows how much it costs. God only knows how much marketing would cost. But I am sure, I'm willing to bet you it's close to a $400 million investment, both marketing and the movie, if not more. A lot riding on it. So Disney is probably just from a conservative estimate, you're looking at $500 million spend, and it's all coming out in 7 weeks. They got to see what happens. They got to make sure. I think they're going to be putting on a happy face, but they're looking. They're going to see what's happening. So, Weiss and Benioff, I wouldn't be surprised if Bob Iger brought him in and said, okay, guys, how confident are you? Because who they got waiting in the wings? They got somebody they're very confident, Kevin Feige. And I'm sure Kevin Feige's chomping at the bit to take over Star Wars because he's already shown where do you go from the MCU? Yeah, you launch it. You got TV shows, you got movies, but you've done 23 movies in the Infinity Saga. Where do you want to go now? What you want to do is you want to make those Star Wars movies climb to the same heights. That's a new challenge. That's a different challenge. And who knows what's going on over there, but I'm sure it's going to be very interesting in the hallowed halls of Disney for the next 6 months at least. So we shall see. JB Bonifacio is here. He says, to quote my favorite movie of the year, it's not a particularly good time to be a Game of Thrones fan. Jojo Rabbit, hashtag Jojo Rabbit. I did not go see Jojo Rabbit last night because I ended up having to prep for this deal today, but I will, and I'm going to, maybe tonight. Alexander Wilson is here. He says, I read over the summer on the gossip sites that there was a major drama between the Game of Thrones prequel showrunners and the HBO and AT&T execs. Well, that's another thing. As many people know, AT&T took over Warner Brothers, and there's huge executive shakeups at HBO, including the exit of beloved executives over at HBO. And here's what's happening in Hollywood. When you're an AT&T exec and you get to come play in the Hollywood sandbox, suddenly you're filled with a new sense of purpose, or you become an egomaniac who doesn't know what the fuck you're doing, but you've got the power. You're wielding the power of Grayskull without understanding what that means. So it wouldn't surprise me, and I've heard that as well, that the showrunners they clashed with their new overlords. And again, their new overlord should have sat back, but everybody wants to piss in the punch when they get to the party. And I'm sure, Alexander, that you're correct. We'll probably never hear what the drama is, but let me tell you, there is that kind of drama. There's even drama on, let's say, small, low-budget, independent feature films that yours truly might be working on. There's always drama. It never goes away when you're dealing with creative people. And when you work on a movie, here's the thing about working on films or television. Everybody thinks they know how to do it. Everybody. Whether you've done it or not, everybody thinks they know how. Everybody. We all watch movies, right? So how hard can it be? Everybody in the world will meet you. I've got a great idea for a TV show. Terrific. Great. Good on you. Alexander Wilson also says D&D Weiss and Benioff show the Game of Thrones pilot to their friends, and one being Craig Mazin. Mazin said to them that the pilot didn't establish the character's relationship to them, and they had a problem. Shouts out to Mazin. Well, I'll tell you, I know Craig Mazin. I used to work with him at an ad agency in the mid-'90s. I was in awe of him when I first met him because he's Princeton educated, and he he wrote, because he worked in advertising, so he's a copywriter. He created the ad line "Danger Runs Deep" on the Crimson Tide poster back in the mid '90s. I worked with him at a place called Jacobs and Gerber. I ended up being I edited, I created actually the "Have You Seen Your Country Today" ad campaign for CBS after Connie Chung and Dan Rather split up, and they went with that for about a year. I was given the ad line. I didn't come up with the ad line, "Have you seen your country today?" But I designed the commercials. And I worked with him then. And then I was also a producer on a film called The Specials that Craig Mazin directed, that James Gunn wrote. James Gunn played Minute Man in the movie. He also wrote the script, and James Gunn directed that film. So seek it out. Hopefully it'll come out on Blu-ray one day. Chris Canmore says, read what D&D said yesterday real quick. Rock on, brother. Please read what D&D said yesterday real quick. Rock on, brother. I don't know what they said yesterday. Well, I'll tell you what. Because I wasn't going to cover that necessarily, but I did read what they said. And they did say that they basically, in a nutshell, they said they needed to concentrate on their Netflix deal. And I believe that it's $250 million. So it makes sense to me. But they did say they love Star Wars and all of that. Alexander Wilson says, if the internet was right and correct, then Hillary Clinton would be president. Jason Whitlock, D&D are not hated. Look at the ratings. That is correct. You are correct, Alexander Wilson. There's much wisdom there, and I don't disagree with you. And that's the thing that people don't always understand. They don't always understand that. Stubble McShave says, adapting pre-existing characters in a story for TV is very different from creating interesting characters and an engaging plot from nothing. Well, it is very different, but it also, don't think it's necessarily easier. If adaptation was easier, people would do it. I mean, it's hard to do both. Look, making movies, creating television and movies is a really hard thing to do and do right. There are many moving parts. A lot of people have to come into play to do it successfully, and you have to have people that understand. Making movies is like an orchestra. A director is like the conductor, but the director is not playing all the instruments. You need one bad instrument can make your orchestra sound like crap, and Hannibal Lecter himself will then go eat the person who's playing badly, as we saw in, of course, Red Dragon. We don't want that to happen. But a conductor is only as good as his orchestra. A director is only as good as his material, and showrunners like Weiss and Benioff, they every time, think about it. We were getting basically an hour-long movie from them every week, and they were giving us 10 for the first 6 seasons a week, or a season. 10 hours. I mean, how many, if you total it up, let's just take it through the 6th season. That's 60 hours. 60 hours. I mean, how many directors have made 60 hours of incredible entertainment? They did. That's a pretty damn good track record. It really, really is. So, yeah, we shall see. But Stubble, I mean, both are hard to do. Koba's here, our favorite primate. Revolutionary primate he is. Did you see the teaser for Dracula from Stephen Moffat and Mark Gatiss? Yes, I did. For those of you who don't know, the Brits have a new Dracula TV series coming, and boy, does it look delicious. It made me want to drink blood. I can't wait to see that show. Looks good to me. I love me some Brits and their TV. It's awesome. Mark Chure is here with Game of Thrones. Like Last Jedi, episodes are ingredients in the long-form storytelling gumbo. One bad shrimp and the whole gumbo is bad. Well, Mark C., I'm a big gumbo fan, and Elizabeth will tell you I love shrimp. So I really appreciate that analogy. And I think you're right. One bad shrimp can ruin your whole day, or ruin your entire TV season, as it were. Gumbo, though, I got to say, gumbo can kind of cover that up if you got a bad shrimp, but not all the time. But you absolutely are right. I love that. But people get away with a couple of bad episodes. So there you go. I got letters, ladies and gentlemen. I've got letters. This first letter, let's see, hang on. This first letter is dealing with the same topic we've been discussing. And praise Rylor. Praise Rylor. The disastrous duo commonly maligned online as Dumb and Dumber for ruining Game of Thrones, a show once heralded as The Sopranos in Middle-earth, have hastily retreated from an extremely lucrative Star Wars deal, meaning Disney dodged a bullet and saved probably tens of millions of dollars in losses. Gemini Man was written by David Benioff. It's expected to lose around $70 million. Okay. He wasn't the only writer, and that script had been around for a long time. But okay, just 17 hours prior to these gloriously glad tidings, David and Dan faced fans at an Austin convention for the first time after announcing they intended to spend the final moments of the show that had occupied a decade of their lives very drunk and far away from the internet, which was a joke. And here they intoned the most tone-deaf statements, saying they wanted to strip the series of any fantasy elements to appeal to NFL watchers, as if you can't like fantasy and football at the same time. Dan also joked that their poorly written scripts were always 1 or 2 lines away from turning into a Monty Python sketch, and that they had never worked in television before and had no idea what they were doing. Yes, they probably, I know, they said all of those things. They did. That much I could have told you upon casual perusal of their objectively awful scripts, each page filled to bursting with purple prose in the type of an author's premier novel, and crucial information communicated off-screen as part of the character's inner thoughts. My dear Robert, it is my conviction that they only got their show on HBO because one of their daddies worked at Goldman Sachs and knew some of the higher-ups working at the legendary premium cable channel. The atheist in me would like to shout, God bless Kathleen Kennedy. I bet she met with them, quickly realized the only George they had anything in common with is the cartoon monkey, minus the curiosity, and fired them swiftly, keeping it quiet for public relations reasons. Then D&D negotiated a Netflix deal. I would love if Netflix executives now saw their comments about getting wasted and their general incompetence and announced they were going to consciously uncouple from the couple of schmucks too, because while I wish them no ill will, I do think they're talentless hacks who got where they are today for I love meritocracies, non-meritocratic reasons, and they have no place in the entertainment industry, save perhaps as mediocre novelists writing stories that Spike Lee can turn into okay movies. The joyous news, coupled with the magnificent Mandalorian trailer, has given me new hope. The past may in fact be dead, but the future just got a whole lot better where Star Wars is concerned. And that was from Franz Morhart, our man Franz. He's not from Germany. He's actually in Canada. He was from Germany, but he's in Canada. Franz, you know what, man? Look, guys, girls, gentle beings, people, they did give us, regardless of what you think and regardless of what they said, they were responsible for a great many hours of television that we all loved. And you can't take that away from them. It's amazing how quickly the fan community turns on creators. And I whether they're talentless hacks or not, they did provide us some amazing, amazing television. And for that, I will forever be grateful. You know what? I can only hope to aspire to something like Game of Thrones. Really. For a change of pace, James Wallace is here once again. Robert, I was watching an interview with Brian Grazer on the Joe Rogan Experience. By the way, great interview. For those of you who don't watch Joe Rogan, watch Brian Grazer. I haven't watched the whole thing. I've caught snippets, but really interesting. Brian Grazer is Ron Howard's longtime producer. They've been working together for decades. He was on Joe Rogan. Really interesting cat. Loved hearing him talk. I actually met him once at the Playboy Mansion. Yes, I did. Had a conversation with him at the Playboy Mansion back in the early aughts. For those who want to know, I went there twice. And one day, if you ever see me in person, ask me to tell you about the Martin Landau story I have about the Playboy Mansion, because it's very funny and you'll respect him even more. A very intriguing man. But one thing he said, and this has been on my mind for some time due to the subject of physical media, is that Brian Grazer was working with Jay-Z on a documentary called Made in America. Jay-Z said something that stuck with Grazer. that the democratization of music itself, there's no record stores anymore. Come to think of it, there isn't really any video stores anymore aside from Amoebas, one in Los Angeles and San Francisco. Plus, you have Vidiots coming back in 2020. Of course, people will say Best Buy. However, there was a really cool DVD, Laserdisc, and video store that also had CDs and magazines. I'm going off memory here, but I might have been missing a few other categories. A coffee house section where you could listen to CDs with headphones. Did Los Angeles have this store? It was called Media Play. Media Play was an oasis for me as a teenager. I would spend countless hours there, either looking at videos or watching on the monitors Raiders of the Lost Ark. It was the Laserdisc version, and it was in the 2:3:5 aspect ratio. For hours, I would scour the video sections multiple times, looking for a glimmer of Raiders on VHS in a letterbox format. People forget or don't really realize that until 1999, Raiders wasn't available on VHS in letterbox, pan and scan only. I knew Indiana Jones and the Last Crusade was in letterbox because Spielberg demanded it be released that way on home video. He detested the pan and scan version. At that point, the internet wasn't readily available to me, so I had no way of knowing if my search was pointless. Around 1994, Star Trek films were being re-released in letterbox on VHS, so again, I was always on the lookout for Raiders and anything else in letterbox. You poor man, you could have been watching Laserdiscs the whole time. 20th Century Fox was re-releasing films on VHS and letterbox due that there was a demand at the time. But remember, they put out things all the way back into the 80s, like Die Hard was first released on home video on Laserdisc, and it was letterboxed. It wasn't first released on Laserdisc on home video, but it was the first release of Die Hard on home video was, in fact, it was letterboxed. And I bought it. I was going to USC at the time. I bought it that day and went to school, and we watched it in underneath in the film school in the cinema library. There was films like The Abyss, Special Edition, Alien, Aliens, Speed, and True Lies, from what I can recall. The Star Wars trilogy was in letterbox, and they were the original versions. In fact, I think those VHS tapes are at my parents' house. I still have a set of the original Star Wars movies sealed, letterboxed on Laserdisc. So it was an exciting time seeing films I'd only seen in pan and scan in their proper widescreen picture. Media Play and Suncoast at that time seemed to be the only place you could buy these films. My friends and I would hang out at Media Play or Suncoast, but Media Play was my spot. In fact, I probably met the woman of my dreams there, but I was a stubborn idiot with a crush on another girl at that point in my life, so I really didn't give the film geek who spoke to me a chance or asked for a phone number. What? This possible woman of my dreams was telling me about a film that James Cameron was making about Titanic, and she was going on and on and on and on about how accurate it would be. The excitement she exhibited would make anyone excited for this film, and this was the fall of 1996, and I vaguely knew what she was talking about. A year later, I thought of her often and wondered what she thought of this film that was at this point the #1 film of all time, not accounting for inflation. That's the thing that seems to be missing now. Again, films and theaters brought a sense of community, but same with video and record stores. Anyway, I really wish something like that was out there now. The Media Play retail chain closed in 2005. It's just too bad nothing else really took its place. Yes, it did. The internet. But I know what you mean. Of course, we have Barnes & Noble in some areas now, but the film-centric vibe that Media Play had is not really in Barnes & Noble chains. I mentioned Amoeba earlier, and as fun as that place is, it's also a bit too grungy for my tastes, and their prices are exorbitant, making the case for buying on Amazon. But somehow that place stays in business. Did you ever go to Media Play or know of it? Have any fond memories there? James, I did not go to Media Play. I started working in video stores in 1980 when I was 13 years old, and I worked as a retailer for 8 years. So video stores, and I worked, the last place I worked, the last couple of years I worked at Silver Platters, which was a chain in Seattle. And it was it started out as a small, it was like 3-4 stores. I think it's at a Zenith. We were at the time the largest optical disc retailer in the world, meaning our South Center store was 10,000 square feet, and all we sold were CDs and laser discs. And let me tell you, I was the manager and buyer of the laser video disc division, of the laser disc division. I was Laser Bob. I wrote even a column for our newsletter, The Laser Visions of Laser Bob, where I wrote a whole article on letterboxing, which I should put up somewhere. Maybe I'll put it on the Burnettwork on the website. So I didn't hang out in video stores only because I was there sort of at the dawn of video stores. I worked at a video store called Video Space, which was, as I've told people before, it was founded by Weston Nishimura. And Weston Nishimura founded the VSDA, the Video Software Dealers Association of America, that turned into a very big deal. And video, it wasn't Video Station that was in LA, but Video Space was one of the first video stores in the country. And I worked there. And in the, I want to say 85, I worked at SRO Video at the Grand Cinemas Alderwood in Linwood, Washington, which is the very first video store that was in a movie theater. And we had a very, very curated collection of films that I was proud of. But yes, I have many, many memories of video store work, but I didn't hang out. I didn't hang out at other video stores. I guess the closest thing, like in Seattle, Scarecrow Video, which is still there. It's different now. It's become nonprofit. But look, I think you're absolutely right. We're missing something. We really are, in terms of, I mean, the internet has replaced it, but there's nothing better than talking to people face to face. And I loved, even when I moved to LA, I would hang out at like, not Vidiot's, but there was a video store right next to the New Art. And why is that? The name is escaping me. Somebody will tell me. But yeah. Chris Canmore says, that's what I read about that. Chris Canmore says, I should have said, please look up what D&D said at the Austin Film Festival. Pretty damning, rock on R&B. That was in that letter. Yeah, it was pretty damning. Road Scholar Comics says, love listening to your opinions, Rob. When on subject, can I get your thoughts on Black Knight in Eternals and my favorite Namor, hopefully entering the MCU soon? Happy they're adding some classics. Well, what's really interesting about the Black Knight, I mean, I find it really interesting that they're adding him in the Eternals. The Black Knight, various incarnations of that character, has a long history in the MCU. Black Knight has been an Avenger. I'm looking forward to seeing what they're going to do with that character and how indeed they're going to tie it into the Eternals and how they're going to, because, one of the things that I find interesting about the MCU is they are using, they're using the comics as a jumping off point, but by necessity, they're creating their own canon within the MCU that's very informed by the comic canon, which I think is great, but they have to change some things. And the idea of bringing Namor in, I love the fact that if we learn, as we did in Infinity War or Endgame, that in Wakanda, there were earthquakes. I mean, Namor's flooded Wakanda before. So in terms of seeing if he truly is the villain in Black Panther 2, I'm all for that. I mean, what's really going to be interesting is seeing how two kings who are both looking out for their people, depending on how they play Namor. And I guess, isn't Namor a mutant? Isn't he officially designated as a mutant? But it's going to be interesting to see how they play all that and how they play off of that. I really love T'Challa going up against Namor and dealing with, what do you do when two kingdoms reach a crossroads and there's maybe a place between them that they can't figure out. I mean, I think it's going to be great. I can't wait to see what they do, and I'm very exciting. I'm happy, like you, that they're adding classic characters. I think it's great. I mean, those are the kind of things. I think that's what the MCU, how it's going to move forward. You can't go back and do, and like they've recently reported that in the next at least decade, there's not going to be another Infinity Saga. And how could there be? Which I think is great. I mean, look, I do want to see Galactus. And as I've thrown out there, I think one of the ways to introduce the X-Men into the MCU, people have talked about, what about the legacy of the X-Men? And you're reading what's going on with Krakoa now. If you read Hickman's X-Men books that I was talking about, you got to pick up that. The hardcover comes out for Christmas. Buy that for any comic book fan. Buy it for yourself when it comes out, because what a great storyline. But I'm thinking, if you're going to do another Avengers movie, I'd make it the Avengers versus the X-Men. I'd introduce the X-Men to the universe that way. Go all in, because why not? They could, or you could, spend all that time doing X-Men movies, but everybody knows the X-Men. Utilize the fact that they've been on the screen for the last 20 years almost and make it work for you. Just jump right in. Who wouldn't want to watch Avengers versus the X-Men? It could be dope. but who knows? But Road Scholar Comics, I want to thank you for that. Thanks for supporting the channel, and always appreciate hearing from people such as yourself. Anthony Gonzalez is here. Anthony says, so I asked Roca and he said yes. Asked Bibbs and he said not necessarily so. So now I ask you, should Kevin Costner have his own Schmodown wheel slice? Well, for those of you who don't know, I've been a longtime participant in various capacities of the movie Trivia Schmodown that's presented to you by Christian Harloff and Mark Ellis, and soon to be on the Schmodown Entertainment Network, SEN, for those of you who don't know. If you don't know what the Schmodown is, it's basically a movie trivia contest that is played like it's pro wrestling. I know. You think it might not work or you think it won't work, but somehow it does. And Roca and William Bibbiani are people. Bibbiani is also a longtime, very good writer on comics, on film. And John Roca recently, well, not recently now, but he came on board and he's now an on-camera host and personality on Collider as well as on the Schmodown. Really nice guy. To know John Roca is to love him. And if you watch the Schmodown, to know John Roca is to hate him too, because he's the outlaw. But he's a great guy. You know, I'd say yes. I think Kevin Costner, I mean, ever since he tore it up in Silverado back in, 85, summer of 85, I think Kevin Costner has been a man who's directed, he's produced, he's acted. I think Kevin Costner is a gem, and I'm a big fan of his. I've been a big fan of his for he's 3.5 decades. I mean, I think he could have a slice. There should be a slice. Why not? He deserves it. He's earned it. So, Anthony, you tell this, the former commissioner of the Schmodown, that would be me, says, goddamn right, there should be a slice on the wheel for Kevin Costner. Absolutely. I'd pick it even if I was still competing. Where's Dagnino? Maybe we'll have to reschedule that revenge match. He'll never beat me. I'll take Dagnino every time. JCL Production says, what's up, Rob? Just finished a thriller short film and it released today. Congratulations, sir. Would lose my mind if you checked it out. The name of it is The Vessel, an Exorcist-inspired $25 short film I think you will like. Well, you know what? Anybody who tells me they've had they made an Exorcist-inspired $25 short film, I'm in. So JCL Productions, why don't you post a link here in the live chat to tell everybody where they can go see it? I always like to promote or sponsor or do whatever I can to help burgeoning, fledgling filmmakers get the word out on their projects. And that's a good time for me to mention that the short film that I cut, Skyfighter, will be dropping on the Dust Network in a little over 2 months. So you guys can all see it. Dust, of course, has lots of sci-fi shorts. I'm a big fan of their network. I'm very happy that Dust picked up Skyfighter. It's very, I think it's impressive for what it is. And very excited to have you all see it. This next letter comes from Marceau or Phil Anastasio. Hi, Viceroy. I hope this letter finds you and my brother and sister imagination connoisseurs living the Lucky Tiger lifestyle. In episode 262, you mentioned blaxploitation films. Growing up in the late 1970s into the 80s, I remember seeing some of these movies on local television stations on Saturday and Sunday afternoons, but it wasn't until my early teens when I saved up enough money to buy a VCR and get video rental membership at the corner video store that I truly got to appreciate their chocolatey goodness. I remember walking around the video store and getting a kick out of the artwork on the covers for these movies and saying to myself, I have to watch these movies. I also remember the looks on the faces of the store clerks when I, a 13-year-old Hispanic kid, approached the counter with videotapes titled Velvet Smooth, The Black Six, and Boss N-Word. I'm not sure if you'd want to read that last title on the air. You can't. You absolutely can't. If I was doing a treatise and I spent an hour talking about all the different blaxploitation movies like Black Caesar or Foxy Brown or Superfly or Shaft or Slaughter in Africa, Slaughter's Big Score, and I were actually to say Boss N-word as a title. I mean, by the way, this is a real movie. I keep talking about it because Dolomite is my name dropped. Boss N-word was a movie directed by Jack Arnold, who directed Creature from the Black Lagoon. And it's a widescreen Western that stars Fred Williamson. Fred Williamson, who's one of the great blaxploitation stars. Fred Williamson is just one of the coolest men who's ever been on a movie screen. And if you go and you watch, if you go look up the trailer, Boss N-word, it's on YouTube right now. Check it out. You'll want to watch the movie. It was loosely inspired by the Clint Eastwood Man with No Name movies, and it's really good. And the character that Wesley Snipes plays in Dolomite Is My Name co-stars with him. And and that movie's actually a good movie. Not that these other ones aren't, but there was a lot of them. Check it out. Anyway, I was also relieved that the clerks let me rent these mostly R-rated movies, but they did, and over time began to appreciate my bizarre taste in film. Some would even ask for recommendation. With that said, I would like to recommend some movies. The Mac, starring Max Julien, 1973. Penitentiary, 1979. I don't know if you think Penitentiary is a blaxploitation movie? I guess it would be on the heels of it, 1979. Black Shampoo. He's black, he's mean, he's a loving machine, from 1976. The Bunch. This movie is also known as Tom, from 1973. And for this time of year, Blackula with William Marshall. William Marshall, who played Dr. Richard Daystrom in the Star Trek episode The Ultimate Computer, building on my work. Blackula is, of course, a fun movie. Keep up the good work with your beard and have a happy and safe Halloween to all. Phil, a.k.a. Marso. Well, Phil, I want to thank you for that appreciation of blaxploitation films. You know, it's really interesting because they run the gamut in terms of quality, but they really capture a time. And what was great about a lot of these movies, and you see this in Dolomite Is My Name, that Rudy Ray Moore really took it upon himself and became as maverick and as independent a filmmaker as there ever was. And it's amazing that he was able to do that. You know, Rudy Ray Moore, for me, when I was growing up, my trifecta with Rudy Ray Moore was, of course, Dolomite, The Human Tornado, and Disco Godfather. And I hope that you all check those out. They're a lot of fun. And go look up the trailers. Look up the trailers for Dolomite, look up the trailers for Human Tornado, and look up the trailer for Disco Godfather, or any of these movies. They're all on YouTube. Boss N-word. It's even the trailer's widescreen. It's nice. Check it out. So I am happy that that Phil, you dig those. And I think because of Dolomite Is My Name, they're going to have a huge resurgence. People are going to go see them and enjoy them for what they are, because there's a lot of fun to be had, indeed. Let's see. This is a quick one. This comes from James Possumi. My friend has an issue with reality. Last week, we went to the cinema and my flashlight came on before the screen lit up. I ended up making 40-foot shadow puppets, and random children loved it as much as it fueled my imagination. I've rigged up a small X-Wing and hope to make a space battle 40 feet tall using the shadows on the screen and the editing software at my library. The shadows work on my wall, and I hope I can show my friend the difference between fantasy and reality. You made a shadow reference as I was thinking of this, and it cemented my idea to carefully move forward with it. Thanks for that and many other things. Listen, let me just say, you better not be sitting in any movie theater I'm in making shadow puppets on the screen. I either will join in or I will have to yell and scream at you. I don't know which would be worse. But thanks for that letter. That's very funny. This letter comes from Ty Smith. Rob, greetings from Arkansas, the natural state. From my first experience watching you on Collider Heroes, following you to the John Campea show, and eventually finding the Burnettwork, I feel confident in saying you appreciate a wide variety of films. Today, I'd like to discuss a genre that I fear is waning: the adult studio comedy. I watched Dolomite Is My Name yesterday, and I absolutely loved it. But in pondering the movie, I found myself growing increasingly troubled. Dolomite Is My Name is the hardest I've laughed during a newly released film in quite some time. But it isn't even a direct comedy, and it wasn't even widely released in theaters. This led me to the question, what is the last theatrical adult studio comedy that I would consider great? This past summer gave us Good Boys, which I found hilarious and endearing, but that movie was largely based around children. The most recent example I can think of is Taika Waititi's What We Do in the Shadows, which was undeniably great, but hit theaters 5 years ago in 2014. Whether you're talking about golden age gems such as Some Like It Hot, 1980s Airplane, or Apatow era standouts like The 40-Year-Old Virgin, studio comedies have long been staples in the cultural zeitgeist, yet we still see films like this less and less hitting theaters today. While I'm admittedly biased due to my longtime cannabis-driven endeavors, Ice Cube's Friday is my favorite comedy, a personal top 10 film, yet I could never see something like it released today. In my estimation, a decrease in movies that lend themselves to a post-dweeby viewing whilst devouring the bag of quesaritos that once snuck into the theater is a decrease in human prosperity. Ultimately, my question is simply this. What the hell happened to the adult studio comedy, Mr. Fun and Wonder, sir? Ty, what a great letter. What a great question. You know, I think one of the great casualties, and we've seen it being talked about, a lot of people talking about this, is that comedic subject matter has become dangerous. And what I mean by that is, in our desire to make sure that everybody's feelings are taken care of and that we don't offend anyone, it's really difficult to make an adult comedy these days without fear of getting in trouble. Because I mean, think about the staples of the very basic level, scatological humor, whether it's fart jokes or anything else, sexual humor, making fun of people, no matter who they are, whether it's people who are handicapped, minority groups, whatever, staples of adult comedy. You can't do any of that anymore. You know, we've become more evolved. We don't want to hurt anyone's feelings. And see, I think that people are staying away from the adult comedies for that very reason. Go back and watch Mel Brooks's Blazing Saddles, made in the early 70s. You'd be shocked at how incorrect, politically incorrect, socially incorrect. It's incorrect on every level, which is what makes it funny, because we used to understand how to laugh at people, how to laugh at ourselves without taking it personally. I mean, the thing I think that great humor does is humor brings the light. It shines a light on all of us, and it makes us laugh. We human beings take ourselves way too seriously, and by God, are people taking themselves way too seriously these days. If you can't make fun of yourself or you can't make fun of others for things we all know are true, then what good is life? You know, I think we have to understand that you can be humorous and you can still be caring about people at the same time. You can do both. I feel you. I mean, I loved Get Him to the Greek, the sequel to Forgetting Sarah Marshall. I thought that movie was hilarious. I really liked All the Snow. I really liked Jonah Hill in it. I love the whole thing. I love the rest of the cast. I love Sean Combs in it. Is hilarious as Sergio, the record label impresario. I mean, I love that movie so much. I miss those days, and that wasn't that long ago. It was like 2012 or something. I think you're right. You couldn't look. You look at half the comedies. Airplane's got body humor. You know, you have a little girl who's getting a cup of coffee, and she says, well, how do you take it? Black, like my men. I don't think you could get away with that joke now, especially if like an 8-year-old girl or a 10-year-old girl is saying something like that. People will be like, you can't say that. But Airplane is full of jokes like that. It's hilarious. and that was made in 1980. I think comedy, until we get through this phase where we once again realize that everybody should and could be made fun of no matter what, there should be no sacred cows in comedy. Oh, but you're not treating people with respect. Yes, you are. By making fun of everybody equally, you're treating them with respect. That's what I have to say. And I don't want to live in a humorous world. So I think you're right. I think somebody needs to bring back. The problem is, who's going to take a risk bringing back an adult comedy for fear of, I mean, look what happens to our, like Dave Chappelle comes on and how many think pieces are written about how uncaring he is and how he should be canceled for his comedy. What's going to happen when Eddie Murphy takes the stage again doing stand-up? Netflix already paid him a boatload of money. I mean, he's got all this goodwill. He's actually, Dolomite Is My Name is aside from the boobies and the bad language, it's almost a family comedy. I mean, it's a sweet-natured film at the end of the day that is about how does a scrappy, independently minded guy who takes the world on his own terms, he succeeds. And it's a movie about how do you succeed with your friends by doing something, fulfilling your dreams. It could be a family comedy, but it's R-rated. Let's hope when Eddie Murphy goes back. I mean, I'm dying to see Coming to America. It's Coming to America 2. I can't believe he's making it with Craig Brewer, who directed My Name is Dolomite. Dolomite Is My Name. Craig Brewer, they had a good relationship, obviously. Eddie Murphy, who famously once said about John Landis, who a terrible line, but one of the greatest lines ever uttered in Hollywood. They had a great relationship, and I'm really looking forward. Dolomite Is My Name, if nothing else, made me really excited to see Coming to America. And while that's not totally adult, it also has a sweet-natured family bent to it. Let's hope it's great. I'd love to see nothing more than the adult comedy come back. I don't know if it will. I don't know if it can, but hope springs eternal. Thanks for writing in. What a great subject. Magic K says, Coppola had an interesting opinion that nowadays the industry does not take risks on making movies. They more depend on franchise and formula. Well, Magic K, that's exactly right. And the reason being is because movies have become so expensive. You know, when Terminator 2, it's interesting, Terminator Dark Fate opens 2 days from now domestically. But when Terminator 1 was made, when Terminator 2 was made, it was made very quickly. And it cost $100 million. And people are like, oh my God, a movie costs $100 million. That was really the first $100 million movie. Now, most studio pictures are 150 million. I mean, tentpole properties, whether it's Harry Potter, whether it's the MCU, whatever, tentpole movies are expensive. And you have to be risk averse. The studios you can't roll the dice on a $150 million movie unless you're guaranteed a return. And that's what they hope. They're risk averse. You know, if Francis Ford Coppola tried to make his film One from the Heart, which basically but Coppola made Apocalypse Now, and then he made One from the Heart in the early 80s. And between those two movies, he basically, busted himself. He could never get those movies made today. I mean, hell, as much as I dearly love Rumblefish, I'd love to see. I mean, maybe you could get it made because it's made based on S.E. Hinton's book. But, man, we just live in a world where, unfortunately, both audiences and the studios, they're looking for, well, dare I say it, more theme park movies. Martin Scorsese was not wrong when he said that. It's more about spectaculars. It's more about, going on a ride. But that's why it's really great to see movies like The Lighthouse in the theater get made. God bless A24 and everything they release, even if it's not great. They have I don't know who are the taste makers at A24, but they sure know what they're doing. So shouts out to A24 for continually providing us with provocative and low budget entertainment. I mean, they're not breaking the bank. Blumhouse too. Blumhouse has a formula. They're spending less than $20 million on movies. They're making $200 million. Halloween Kills is shooting right now, one of 2 Halloween movies they're doing, after Halloween 2018 made so much money. So there's a lot of people that are still crushing it at the lower budget level. And I think the studios, look at Joker. We talked about it the other day, $61 million spend on the movie, $100 million in marketing. You're closing in on $1 billion. That means the studio is taking home a huge chunk of cheddar. They have made the green on that movie, and I hope it leads to more interesting fare being made at that mid-level. I mean, can you imagine if a studio could be making $65 million movies 3 or 4 times a year that grossed 800 million, 850 million? We'd live in a much different industry. It'd be great. But unfortunately, when you have Ivy League educated business people picking the projects, they have to be risk averse because they don't know what is really good or bad. No studio executive is going to set a trend. They're all going to chase trends because they don't know what will break through or not. Anyway, oh, I love this letter. Hi, Rob. I'm 19 and I'm making my way through some classic films I haven't seen yet. By the way, this comes from Owen Toohey. I wonder if you're any relation to Angela Toohey. I went to summer camp with an Angela Toohey whose dad owned a McDonald's in Chehalis, Washington, which I thought was pretty cool. Anyway, I'm 19 and I'm making my way through some classic films I haven't seen yet. So far, I've watched The Shawshank Redemption, Silence of the Lambs, which are both great, and I'll probably watch Jaws too. Probably you're going to watch Jaws? Actually, I'll probably watch Jaws, comma, TOO too. You got to watch Jaws, and then you have to watch Jaws 2 because it's a much better sequel than most people give it credit for, and it has an incredible John Williams score. I also got around to watching The Shining for the first time. Good man, because of course the upcoming Dr. Sleep that everybody is talking so highly about is a sequel to The Shining, not just the book but the movie. There's a lot of how crazy is it that Steven Spielberg utilized so much imagery, recreated the Overlook Hotel, and they're doing the same thing in Dr. Sleep. Crazy, crazy, crazy. Anyway, I got around to watching The Shining for the first time. I thought the film was very good and had great performances and mise-en-scène, although I was puzzled at moments such as the infamous bear suit scene. And the last shot of the picture frame on the wall showing Jack Torrance in 1921. After looking at some theories online, it appears the Overlook Hotel sucked his very soul into the hotel itself. And this is true to the book's ending. You know, I have right here, I've shown it before, there's a pile of books on top of it. I do have the 4K Shining disc. Now I'm eager to watch the sequel, Dr. Sleep. I was wondering what your expectations of this film were, or if you've seen it, what were your overall thoughts? I doubt it will live up to Kubrick's original, but hopefully it'll be a worthy successor. Owen Toohey. P.S. What did that bear suit symbolize anyway? Well, for those of you who remember The Shining, there is a very interesting or crazy moment where it appears somebody is caught in the middle of fellatio, and that person who's performing the deed is in a giant bear suit, a cartoon bear suit. And I don't presume to know what that all means. I think all viewers should leave that up to their interpretation. Not only that, but they were ghosts. I mean, you're watching their ghosts. And I'm going to put a link, Mr. Toohey, I'm going to put a link into the live chat right now of a video that I'm quite fond of about this very thing. So here it is. It says no film school. Check it out. And I will let you decide and report back, because far be it for me to, as your burgeoning film education, I would not want to tell you what certain things mean. That would be unfair. But I want to thank you for your letter, and I'm glad you saw Shawshank Redemption and Silence of the Lambs. Did you watch Manhunter, Michael Mann's Manhunter, before Silence of the Lambs? And if you're going to watch Jaws, let me recommend a few more. You've got to watch Rosemary's Baby. Since it's Halloween, Rosemary's Baby, you have to watch. You have to watch the original The Exorcist, which is still, I think, the greatest. If there's a Star Wars of horror movies, The Exorcist is it, especially if you're Catholic or you're deeply religious. I wanted to be deeply religious, either a Christian or a Catholic, when I watched it the first time, because it would have been that much scarier. So check out that if you haven't seen those movies. Other movies you should check out. I'm going to give out a shout out because I love this movie, I think, more than anyone else. John Carpenter's Prince of Darkness. watch Prince of Darkness, or better yet, watch all 3 of John Carpenter's Apocalypse trilogy movies. Watch The Thing, which is amazing, Prince of Darkness, and of course, In the Mouth of Madness. Check those out. But there's so many good ones. I'm just assuming you're on a horror tip because Shawshank is a Stephen King story. By all accounts, everybody's Dr. Sleep has looked great. To me, I read the book. The book is a sequel to The Shining that deals with an adult Danny Torrance, and they're a group of people out there that are looking for those that also have the Shining capability to devour. They literally, basically, to devour their powers. And of course, Ewan McGregor plays the adult Danny Torrance. I can't wait for the movie. I am very excited for it. You know, I didn't love the book, to be honest. I didn't love the book, but it was interesting. I just didn't love it. As I've said before, and I've been pilloried for this, of Stephen King's latest works, I've not read The Institute yet. It's still here, but Revival. I liked Revival of all of his novels. That was the one. I mean, I also read The Outsider. By the way, The Outsider had a really goofy, I thought a goofy, when you find out what's going on, I'm like, I don't know if I buy this. But the show, the HBO series that they've made of the book looks amazing. Man, does it look good. And I'm sure they can only improve it. So looking forward to that. And I'm glad you're 19 and diving into your film education. Other movies I would suggest you watch, horror films that I loved. The First Phantasm, of course, Dawn of the Dead. But you really should watch Night of the Living Dead, George Romero's Night of the Living Dead first, because it is such a seminal movie. Zulawiski's Possession from 1981. That'll blow your mind. Maybe I shouldn't tell a 19-year-old to watch it, but you should watch it just to see what you make of it. Right back if you survive. I mean, it's not that it's unsurvivable, but it's a movie about a marriage that goes really badly. You should check it out. It's really it's it's a lot of fun, that movie. And it is on Blu-ray. Mondo put out a really cool edition of it. I have a blue velvety box of that movie, and it is loads of fun. Let's see. What do I got here? What's coming up here? Looking for a night of fright? Well, this imagination connoisseur, Chris Wigglesworth, is here. He has some movies that he suggests. Hey, Rob, being an unabashed horror fan for most of my life, my tastes running the whole genre from cheeseball horror comedy like Basket Case all the way. Come on, Belial. I like Basket Case. You know, it's interesting. Basket Case I was watching in the early 80s, where the more lurid and disgusting movies were, the better. Basket Case was a good one. Also, if you haven't seen Blood-Sucking Freaks, that's another one. Not a great film, but certainly the exploitation elements are there. Yeah, you can't be young and not. I mean, watching those kinds of horror movies is like listening to punk rock. Basket Case all the way to The Exorcist, and of course, I like Halloween 3 as well. Are you singing the Silver Shamrock theme song? It is the 29th today. So what is it? 2 more days till Halloween, Halloween, Halloween. 2 more days till Halloween. Silver Shamrock. Sing it with me now. I love Halloween 3. Since Halloween is just a couple of days away, I thought I would offer a couple of horror movie recommendations. You've discussed some of these on prior shows, but in the interest of being seasonal, I thought they warranted another mention, and perhaps you could offer new or additional thoughts. Just as a side note, I'd like to keep my Halloween movies to the supernatural side of the genre. I like that. I like the supernatural side. A couple of these are well known, and a couple of these seem to have fallen into the forgotten territory, but are still worth a watch this time of year. One thing that these have in common is they are allegedly based on true events. Here are my picks in descending order. The Changeling from 1980, starring George C. Scott and Trish Vanderveer. Love The Changeling. Recently, a Blu-ray was released. It's great. How can you not love The Changeling? A great story, great movie, really well done. George C. Scott is great. Not as great as he is in The Exorcist 3, though, which everyone knows. I think The Exorcist 3 has one of the great screenplays ever written for a horror movie. It was written and directed by William Peter Blatty, who was a Jesuit, who did go to Georgetown University. The Amityville Horror from 1979. To me, the original is still much more frightening than any of the sequels or the remake. One of my favorite performances from Margot Kidder. I like the Amityville Horror. I was sick when the book came out. I got the book from the Sci-Fi Book Club, and I was sick. I was like violently like throwing up sick, but I powered through and I read the Amityville Horror book while I was horribly sick, and I loved it. And I like the movie too. The Entity, based on the book. I'm just aside. This is an aside. I'll tell you. Hang on. The Entity from 1982, starring Barbara Hershey and Ron Silver. Let me tell you about The Entity. So Frank D. Felita, who wrote that novel, I took that novel to 7th grade, my first day of 7th grade, which was a junior high school. And on the cover of the paperback book, it had a woman with her head thrown back, and it said, ravaged, if I remember this correctly, ravaged night after night, preyed upon by a spectral rapist. And we were supposed to read because you were told to bring a book. So I brought that book and I was reading it in class. Mr. MacArthur, my English teacher, said that that was inappropriate for a 12-year-old to be reading The Entity. And by God, Mr. MacArthur was right. But I was reading it anyway because I had a massive collection of very inappropriate horror novels for a 12-year-old to be reading. But he took it away. He took my copy of The Entity away, and I had to go buy another one, which I did. And the book was a pretty thick book. It was not like some 200-page special. I mean, it was, anyway, The Entity. Do I like the movie? Didn't Sidney Furie direct The Entity? The same man who directed Iron Eagle? I remember not loving the movie. Maybe because I was older. I don't know. But not a bad movie. I know it's recently been re-released. Shout put it out, I think, on Blu-ray. The Exorcist from 1973. As far as I'm concerned, this is the gold standard of horror movies. I agree because, again, I've said it a million times. Why is The Exorcist so great? Because it's about something. The story is about a Catholic priest who loses his faith in God, and in confronting maybe Satan himself, he comes to find his faith again. What a great story. And that's what makes, what are great horror movies to me? Great horror movies are about the fear of having to live another day. Killing people's easy, but it's hard when you know that there's that much evil in the world. How do you survive? How do you go on? And The Exorcist is about that very thing, and that's why I love it so much. Supernatural horror films are it's hard to do supernatural. A movie that I've had a love-hate relationship with, Fear No Evil just came out on Blu-ray. Fear No Evil. And I don't know if I love that movie, but it's kind of good. It's supernatural, and I kind of enjoyed it. I just watched the 4K version of Angel Heart that just came out on 4K disc, and it's beautiful. I love Angel Heart. Love that movie a lot. But in terms of supernatural, I mean, are zombie movies, Dawn of the Dead? I guess it would be. I don't know if zombie movies really zombie movies could be supernatural or they could be horror. Like Tombs of the Blind Dead is more supernatural. But I know what you mean. I mean these are Amityville Horror, Changeling, Entity, Exorcist are basically ghost stories. But those are right up there, man. I can't fault that. There are so many other great horror movies, but I find myself gravitating to those around this time of year. I'm also eagerly awaiting your list of horror movies. I like to drink wine when watching movies for horror, and my personal recommendations are to pair these with something dark and full-bodied, like a Petite Sirah, a Petite Sirah, a Grenache, or a Zinfandel. What about like a Cabernet Sauvignon? Thanks, Rob. I'd like to wish you, the mods, and all of the PGS a safe and happy Halloween. I still got to think about more supernatural. It's interesting because a lot of this movie Countdown that came out, that's kind of supernatural. Of course, The Ring is supernatural. But if you want to watch, look, I've said it before, Kyushu Kurosawa's original Pulse is a movie that it's full of existential dread, and it's a supernatural film. I really like that movie a lot if you have not seen it. I think it's good. Watch that. Jeffrey Mao is here. Mau, mau, mau. Hi, Rob. I'd like to take this letter to detail my current setup with my home theater, what my plans are for them, and maybe this can elicit a little discussion amongst the Post-Geek Singularity as how they're doing their home theater or media watching setup. So right now, by the way, you're speaking my language. So right now, I have two places where I can watch stuff. The first being my living room and the other being my basement where I have a projector set up. My living room has my Sony Bravia 4K TV mounted. I think it's 55 inches, not big enough. If I remember correctly, I have a Sony soundbar and subwoofer as kind of my control center. I had my Blu-ray player, a set-top box, and a region-free DVD player plugged into the soundbar. I got rid of the STB and I replaced the Blu-ray player with a Sony 4K player. So did I. Being that my soundbar is not 4K pass-through, it was a good thing that I bought the model 4K player as I did, as it has an audio-only HDMI output, so I can plug that into my soundbar. If people are considering upgrading to 4K, make sure that you check the specifications on the player and see what outputs it has. If it has only one, then you need to make sure that everything else is 4K compliant. Now, my TV has an optical audio out, so I could also have connected a cable from that to my soundbar, but I'm trying to minimize cable clutter. For my basement, well, that's a little bit more complicated. Being that a projector is ceiling mounted, I have a drop ceiling. I had to snake the power and the HDMI cables up through the wall and down to connect to the projector. Good man. I have a regular Blu-ray player and my lone STB going through my old Onkyo 5.1 receiver, which outputs HDMI to a splitter. I split the video between my old Samsung HD TV and the projector so that when I want to just watch the TV, I can. Since the receiver is also old and can't pass through 4K, I can only output audio, and I can't use it as a hub or control center if I get a 4K player. So I'll probably need to get the same player upstairs and just output audio to the receiver. For my projector, I have my eye out on the ViewSonic PX747-4K, which is the only 4K projector that I could find that sells for less than $1,000. It's around $980, which is still pretty darn steep, but nothing is less than nothing is less than $200 more. There are plenty of projectors that sell for way more. I'm hoping Santa Claus is kind and Black Friday will cut the price on that. Even 100 or 150 I'd be okay with. So even if I get that one, there's a question of mounting it, as it was a pain and a half figuring out a way to mount my current projector. I had to search the web forever to find a solution that worked. As long as I can find a mounting plate that fits, I'm okay. So you've probably figured that the cable I'm currently running to the projector is not 4K compliant. And yep, that means I got to run another cable, which would be straight from the player. I still have to leave the current cable in place in case I want to watch something coming from my receiver. Most projectors now have 2 HDMI inputs, so I'm okay there. The pain is just having to run another cable, but I hope also HDMI cables are expensive. But I hope that the new cable I need to run, just so you know, I'm like a monster cable guy from way back, so I know. People are going to be like, you don't have to buy monster cable. I know, but I'm a cable snob. Everything would be easier but more expensive if I upgraded my soundbar and my receiver, but since I already have to spend money on the projector, I'd rather put more money into video than audio. Oh, son. The receiver is running fine, and I'd only replace it if it craps out. At this point, I'm not considering any upgrade to my audio. I have pretty good and cheap Polk speakers in 5.1. The receiver can add 2 more speakers, but I don't know if that counts as true 7.1. But again, I'd have to run wires and figure out where to mount them. With the layout of my basement, I don't really have obvious places for them anyway. I know that audio is a complete rabbit hole in terms of how nice you can go with the setup. Unless you have a room solely dedicated to a theater, then anything is just a compromise. I'm doubting that any improvements to audio would make my current setup obsolete. In terms of longer-term upgrade ideas, the most obvious would be to move the Sony downstairs and replace the Samsung if and when it dies. At this point, it's still hanging in there. My first HD TV was a 32-inch Sony Bravia that I bought for like $1,700 in 2006, and it lasted until a couple of years ago, and it started developing lines on the screen. I bought that Samsung when we moved into our first house back in 2011, so it's probably got a few years left. I still grit my teeth watching 4K on the Sony because some movies with 235:1, like Apocalypse Now, with the letterboxing, that image is not that big on a 55-inch screen. Don't get me wrong, I much prefer how things are now compared to watching 235 on Laserdisc on a 40-inch CRT TV. You said it, brother. If there's one technological improvement that I wish I could get are TVs that are self-adjusted with their width based on the aspect ratio of the displayed video. So you maintain the same height but extend or contrast the width. Well, you could do that with a projector. and a screen, if you have a screen that you can adjust, it seems like something that projectors should be able to do better because there's no physical equipment to adjust. You could make it. I have no problem setting up a screen like that. Well, that's all for now. I look forward to hearing your thoughts. Thanks, Jeffrey Mao. P.S. Could you talk about a couple of your favorite sports films? I never hear you talk about sports movies. I would like to, though. I know this is very different from my usual letters. Well, first of all, let's talk about sports. I love sports movies. Even though I'm not the biggest fan of sports, I love sports movies. And a couple of my favorite sports movies, first of all, Slapshot, The Longest Yard, 70s version, Slapshot, Longest Yard. And I loved a movie that I have called North Dallas 40. It's a football movie that I really, really like. Of course, I love movies like 8 Men Out. There's No Crying in Baseball. Why am I drawing a blank on the name? I love The Natural. I like sports movies. Look, Any Given Sunday, Oliver Stone's Any Given Sunday. How can you not love that? I recently showed Elizabeth Bull Durham, which I love. I love Bull Durham. She wasn't that impressed, but she liked it. The new Criterion Blu-ray of Bull Durham is terrific. Let's see what other sports movies. Pride of the Yankees. I'll watch any sports movie, to be honest. And then, of course, there's cutesy sports movies, stuff like The Sand-A-Lot, and but I like serious sports movies where they turn sports into almost religion in a way. That's why I love Bull Durham. There's something almost holy about the way they treat minor league baseball, and it's delightful. White Man Can't Jump. William Friedkin, the man who directed The Exorcist, directed Blue Chips for Paramount because his wife ran Paramount, and Sherry Lansing, and a movie I quite enjoy. But yeah, there's a lot of movies I love. Now, first of all, look, I'm a big proponent of home theater, and I think audio is definitely just as important as video. They go hand in hand. What you want is, and a lot of people don't quite understand how the movie-going experience can be really enhanced by surround sound systems. And look, there's a lot of prepackaged surround sound systems that you can buy that are okay. But what you need are speakers that are big enough, and it's hard to find them now, that aren't expensive, that provide enough presence. You need to feel the sound. You got to hear the sound. And what's really great is if you have a surround sound system that's decent. And a lot of people don't quite understand, like, what does 5.1 even mean? 5.1 surround sound. It seems pretty self-explanatory, right? Well, 5.1 means you have 6 speakers. And a common surround setup is dialogue in movies is usually in mono, which means it's literally mono. It's recorded in mono. So when you have a proper surround sound setup, dialogue in films, the dialogue gets sent into the center channel, and the center channel usually goes right below your screen. So immediately, your experience of hearing people talk in movies is going to be different because you're going to be hearing it. It's going to be crisper. And what happens is a 5.1 surround sound system is your center channel, your left and your right stereo channels. So that's 3 channels. Your rear surround channels. So left and right surround. And then that's 5. And then your 0.1 is your low frequency or your subwoofer. And I will tell you, and you buy those little things with these little square, that doesn't work. What you really need, to be honest, is you really need to get a separate amplifier. Like, I'm running a Pioneer Elite amplifier in my bedroom where I've got a garage. I've just never set up a big home theater since where we live now. But in our bedroom, we've got 7.1, actually, 7.1 surround. And because you've got side channels and rear channels, and also we have a center channel as well, center rear surrounds, because you can have mono surround or you can have stereo surround. And if you add, say, Dolby Atmos, I mean, you can get up to 11.1 surround. You can have speakers below and above you if you're going to go Atmos. But having decent surround sound, and I mean full, you need to feel it. Little tiny square speakers that come in a lot of these prefab surround sound systems are not going to do it for you. They're not going to do it for you. But look no further than the opening of Apocalypse Now. You hear Apocalypse Now with the helicopters whirring around you before the end starts, hearing it's amazing. Watching your favorite science fiction movie, watching any movie. Shawshank Redemption sounds amazing in surround because of the way the music is. Now, music for movies is usually, I mean, you have music in the surround channels too, but the music stays, for the most part, they're stereo pairs. So you've got the dialogue is removed from the music, so you can hear it even more, and then the music has more presence. If you're just listening to a movie in stereo with left and right, you're hearing all the sounds. But what surround does is it separates out sound, and it's also directing sound around you, and it can be really, really important. I mean, anything that has an active surround mix, ambient noise, just when you're outside and you hear that's out movie outside sound that you hear that has the crickets and that kind of thing. It's great. Surround sound is if you aren't watching movies or TV in surround, you really should. It'll change your life as long as it's good. And as far as picture goes, there's a lot of, like, I've been looking at a short throw projectors that you can literally bump up against a screen. Although I'm a stickler for that. I'm looking for, what I would like to have is an 80-inch or 77-inch OLED set for the room. But the ones I want are I want a Panasonic OLED. It's like $12,000 in the UK. They don't even make one here yet. But look, surround sound and home theater, there's channels on YouTube devoted to it, and I always look at them enviously. But it'll change your life. Great sound and great picture it'll enhance your enjoyment of your life. It just will. And I'm a big fan. I love to see pictures. I want to do like maybe a home theater thing on the Burnettwork.net website, and have people write in and show pictures of your gear. Unfortunately, I live in Los Angeles, and I have lots of friends that are very well-to-do, and they spend $500,000 buying a projector, like the same projector that's in a movie theater, 4K projectors that they have in their homes. And I know people that have surround sound systems that have 56 speakers. Yeah. $1 million home theaters. And that's just for the equipment. That's not even for the room. Boy, what I'd do if I was rich, let me tell you. Ian Samuels is back. Ian Samuels is here. Oh, and Ian's providing the updates on something I'm very interested in. BBC is running their new War of the Worlds television series set in the Victorian era, just like the book. This is Ian. Ian says, despite the issues I had with the first episode, there must have been something in it to keep me watching. One thing that the first episode did do well, it ramped up the tension. And so into the second episodes, where the tension ramped up by the first episode is added to by ramping up on the emotions, pulling at our heartstrings a number of times. It reminds us that this is a human story and a survival story. There is some action, no named Thunderchild, but a number of warships in the Thames fighting back against the Martian fighting machines, now showing a visible heat ray. Why not in episode 1? Then came a surprise to me. With the emotions ramped up, they ramp up the horror. Yes, indeed. Sci-fi, thriller, emotional story, and horror. What more can you want? Well, maybe a more accurate adaptation of the source material, but that maybe is just my own gripe. Finally, at the end of episode 2, we are left with hope. Interesting plot point added is that the refugees from London, where are they aiming to take the survivors? Well, as an odd counterpoint to a famous event in the future, with this story being based in the 1890s, they're trying to get the survivors to Dunkirk. Interesting choice. So what do I think so far? Well, is it H.G. Wells' War of the Worlds? No. Like every other adaptation, they missed the mark. But at the same time, it is a good story, well told, and most definitely influenced by Wells's work. Would I recommend seeing it? Yes, definitely. Despite my own issues in wanting to see an accurate adaptation, it's still a good story well told. Well, Ian, I want to thank you for continuing giving us those updates because I am very interested. As many of you know, the original War of the Worlds adaptation from 1953 that Byron Haskin directed was, in fact, my first favorite movie of all time. And when you talk about horror, I've talked about it before, but I couldn't believe they killed a priest in that movie. As a 5-year-old, I was like, wow, they went there. Yes, they did. And I knew what I was watching. I mean, it was one of those things. It was one of those moments you have, when you're a kid and you're watching something and you literally do that, like you look around to make sure that nobody else is seeing this because you knew you were going to get in trouble. That's how I felt. That's how I felt. Koba says, my favorite horror movie has to be The Omen. Jerry Goldsmith's theme gave me chills. Ave Satani. Ave Satani. Yes, they just released a killer box set, Scream Factory did, of the Omen series, including all the way up through the remake. I like the Omen a lot. One of my favorite deaths is in Omen 3. I think Omen and Damien Omen 2 and the Final Conflict Omen 3 are all respectable. They're all good. And the music is great. Even Omen 3 has a killer Goldsmith score. Killer. So yeah, I'm a fan of the Omen. And the Omen's got great deaths in it. One of my favorite deaths in any movie is in Omen 3, is in the Final Conflict, and it involves a typewriter, believe it or not. If you haven't seen Omen 3, check it out. Anthony Gonzalez is here. He says, how much do you think Cameron was influenced by Heinlein's Starship Troopers for his film Aliens? We all owe Heinlein so much. I think a lot. But you know what, though? I think where Cameron came from, I really think that he was thinking Vietnam. He really was. And of course, there had been a slew of Vietnam movies that had come out. I think Cameron has always been fascinated. He probably, I don't know if his brother was a soldier, but he was a former truck driver, so I'm sure he knew a lot of grunts. He probably had a lot of friends that came back from Vietnam and had a lot of things to tell him. But yeah, I definitely think he had read Starship Troopers and was thinking along those lines. I absolutely do. And Heinlein, yeah. And why has no one made, I mean, I love Starship Troopers, but why has no one made Stranger in a Strange Land? Or things like Glory Road. There's so many Heinlein books that you cry out for adaptation. But I think Cameron was, in fact, influenced by Heinlein. Travis Rayner is here. Travis says, Rob, you are on a deserted island. I ask people this question all the time. You are on a deserted island and you can only have 5 films to watch. What are these films? Well, it's funny. I mean, I'm going to cheat and I'm going to say the Godfather trilogy as one because I want all 3. I like Godfather 3. Sue me. Change my mind. I like Godfather 3 a great deal. Is it perfect like Godfather 1 and 2? No, but it's still got a lot of great stuff in it that I like. So I would take the Godfather trilogy. I'd probably take Lord of the Rings too, just because it's 3 movies in one. So I have now 6 movies because you asked me the question, but I'm making up the rules. So that's 2 movies. I would probably take All That Jazz because All That Jazz is absolutely one of my favorite movies of all time, and I never get tired of watching it. Oh, gosh. I would probably take Almost Famous, but the uncut version, just because it makes me feel good. I like Almost Famous. So if I was stuck on a desert island, I would have to have that as well. And I think my 5th movie, the 5th movie would be Wings of Desire, Wim Wenders' Wings of Desire, because that's I as far as fantasy films go, and that movie makes me think and introspective, and those are movies that and they're long too. So that's good. That would probably be my 5 films to watch. Because I wouldn't want necessarily overt genre movies because they not enough happens in them. So I'd need to take movies that are more ruminations on humanity than say like Empire Strikes Back, which I wouldn't. I've seen it so many times already, but after you watch it, it's like it's more. Well, it is what it is. I'd rather watch films that are more contemplative. You know, it hasn't come out yet, but maybe I would have taken Vim Vender's 5-hour version of Until the End of the World just because it's 5 hours. And I love the music. I'm so looking forward. I've wanted to see that for 30 years, and I'm so glad that it's coming out on Blu-ray for the Christmas season. By the way, All About Eve coming out, Criterion next month. Woohoo! And Betty Blue. Oh, another favorite film of mine coming out. I already have the extended director's cut Blu-ray. I got it from Europe when it first came out, but I bet Criterion's transfer is stunning. So I'm very excited to get all of those. But that's a good question. It's never you never go wrong asking people their Desert Island discs. You never go wrong. Oh, Rick Berg says, do the Martians use black smoke? Rick, I believe that in Ian's last letter, he says that there is black smoke. I don't know how you could do an adaptation of War of the Worlds and not use the black smoke. But I don't know that for a fact. That is a very, very good question. So, yeah, I think that, yeah, probably. This one comes from Logan George. It's a long one. Hey, Rob, there's been a lot going on lately in fandom, and I didn't check the read on the air option because I will be getting into. Well, wait. You know what? He's telling me not to read this on the air. So, because he thinks it's too spoilerific. So I won't read it. I don't want to be spoilerific. You know me. I don't want to be spoilerific. Here's one from Victor Acosta. And it doesn't start out hashtag Willow Yang forever. I will love her. I will read this anyway. How Disney made me lose all interest in the Star Wars saga. I'd like to title this letter. Hi, Rob. It's been a while since I've written. Oh, wait, man. Did I already read this? I think I did. No, maybe not. I'm going to read it anyway. Hi, Rob. Been a while since I've written, but since the release of the latest Star Wars trailer finally made me realize something I hadn't come to grips with. I figured it was about as good a time as any to share some of my thoughts with you. For as long as I can remember, I've always considered myself an unabashed Star Wars fan. Ever since I saw The Empire Strikes Back on a kindergarten field trip to a movie theater in May of 1980, I don't think I've read this, and the wonderful adventures of Luke Skywalker and his friends embedded themselves into my young and impressionable mind, I have devoured anything related to Star Wars with glee and wonder. After watching Empire Strikes Back, I quickly went and watched Star Wars as soon as I could find it on local TV. Back in the early 80s, there was no such thing as cable TV in my childhood home, and VHS was still a few years away, so it took me a while to finally find and watch Star Wars, or A New Hope, as it is referenced to now. Don't ever call it A New Hope. It's Star Wars. Nonetheless, I persevered, and after a few months, I finally saw a TV commercial letting me know that my favorite local channel would air Star Wars. So in a matter of 2 months, I was up to speed on the Skywalker saga and eagerly awaiting the final chapter, which would arrive 3 long years later in the form of Return of the Jedi. But let me tell you that 3-year-long wait was unbearable for me, but boy, was I pleasantly satisfied when Jedi rolled in and I finally got to see Luke rock that awesome black outfit, still my favorite look for him, and kick some serious ass on Jabba's hoverboat. To me, Return of the Jedi was excellent, with the obvious exception that maybe the original idea of having Wookiees instead of Ewoks in the last battle would have made it better. And it delivered an excellent end to the adventures of Luke and his friends, and thus the Skywalker saga came to a glorious end. Or so we thought at the time. That's in the letter. That wasn't me editorializing. For a long time afterwards, my love for Star Wars slowly diminished as Return of the Jedi quickly became a fond memory of my childhood. Star Wars slowly diminished as Return of the Jedi quickly became a fond memory of my childhood. But then, in 1991 and 93, as I was entering my last years of high school, Timothy Zahn once again rekindled my love for the adventures of Luke and his friends with the release of the glorious Thrawn trilogy. Finally, here we had a continuation of the adventures of some of my favorite characters, and they felt just as great, if not maybe even better, than the movies that had come before. And thus, my love of Star Wars was back. Then came the prequel trilogy, and even though, as you like to say, those were bad movies, they were still good Star Wars and gave us an interesting look at how a nice kid turned into the Dark Lord of the Sith we all learned to hate back in the original trilogy. Granted, that whole no scene at the end of Return of the Sith is still Revenge of the Sith is still cringeworthy even to this day. And Jar Jar Binks is still a blight on the name of Star Wars. But the prequel trilogy gave us these things. A wonderful new villain in Darth Maul, even though he was badly misused and killed off way too quickly. Or so we were led to believe back then. B, that great Duel of the Fates track in the soundtrack of Episode 1, still, in my opinion, one of John Williams' best compositions. I do not disagree. C, cool new fight choreography for the Jedi, which made what we'd seen in the original trilogy look tame in comparison. And D, Mace Windu's cool purple-ass lightsaber. Although the prequel trilogy did kind of tarnish my unabashed love for Star Wars, it did not kill it. And so my fandom for all things Star Wars remains strong. I even watched the damn Clone Wars animated show, which is great, by the way, and it just got better. Still, to me, the original trilogy was the best Star Wars there was, so you can imagine my delight when I heard that Disney had bought the rights to Star Wars from George Lucas, and they were planning to make a new trilogy to end the Skywalker saga properly. I was even more thrilled when news came out that the original cast members would all be returning to reprise their roles in this new trilogy. I knew that because of the actors' different ages, it would be impossible to have something like the Thrawn trilogy, but even so, I could not wait to see how the Skywalker saga would end. And so, when The Force Awakens came out, I religiously made sure to have tickets for opening night to enjoy the beginning of the end for the adventures of Luke, Han, Leia, Chewie, and the droids. But that wasn't really what we got in The Force Awakens, was it? No. Instead, we were introduced to a bunch of new characters we had absolutely no emotional attachment to. We got to see Han Solo being killed by his own son, and on top of it all, we didn't get any Luke Skywalker until the last damn minute of the movie. Needless to say, I did not enjoy the beginning of this new trilogy, Rob. While I understood the choice to kill Han, we all know that's the only reason Harrison Ford accepted to come back in the first place, I could not for the life of me understand how Disney, Kathleen Kennedy, and Mr. Abrams thought it was okay to have a Star Wars movie without Luke in it, especially when this is supposed to be the end of the Skywalker saga. On top of that, none of the new characters seemed even remotely interesting or new, and they all seemed to be rip-offs of the original trilogy, Luke, Han, and Leia, even down to that damn new BB-8 droid, which was clearly supposed to be an R2 rip-off. And don't even get me started on how C-3PO and R2 were treated. But still, I held out hope. That glimmer of Jedi Master Luke Skywalker at the end of the movie gave me hope that good things were still coming. Then came Last Jedi, and boy, did my hope fizzle out. I was eagerly awaiting Last Jedi and trying to avoid spoilers for the movie, but in the last few days before the movie premiered, I could not contain myself, and I foolishly watched a spoiler review on YouTube. That's when I found out about Luke throwing away his old saber like it was trash, about him becoming an old disillusioned hermit who did not want to get involved or even want to train Rey, about the whole Casino Planet subplot thing that went nowhere, about Snoke being a completely unimportant to the plot of this trilogy, about kamikaze lightspeed attacks that for some reason had never been used in the movies until now. Let me just stop and editorialize. I loved that. I thought it was so cool and the way the sound went out. It didn't bother me at all. I thought it was awesome. And about the ignominious death of Luke Skywalker at the end of the movie after having an imaginary fight with his nephew, no less. All of these revelations hit me hard, Rob, so hard that I decided then and there that for the first time I could remember, I had no interest in going to see Star Wars at a movie theater. So I skipped going to see Last Jedi at a movie theater and just decided to wait for the video release, which I would inevitably catch on Netflix. And even when I finally did see it on Netflix, I could not derive any enjoyment from it. It bored me to tears, and it infuriated me that they decided to take out Luke Skywalker like they did. Also, the implied romantic connection between Kylo and Rey seemed to come out of nowhere and absolutely made no sense to me. So, now we come to it, to Rise of Skywalker, touted as the end of the saga, and we get this final trailer saying how the story will live forever. And do you want to know what this great piece of marketing made me realize? Well, I'll tell you. It made me realize that I no longer care or have any interest about how the story will end, and that has left me feeling empty. It's almost as if a part of my life that once held great meaning for me is suddenly gone, and I did not even realize it until this very moment. Years I'd invested on this franchise now all seem like a waste of time to me, because as we come to the end of the story, I suddenly find that in the end, all the characters which were important to me have been discarded and done away with, to be replaced by new characters that I have no emotional attachment to. And even though Disney is bringing back the Emperor and Lando to try and reignite that whole sense of nostalgia and win back all of us old Star Wars fans, I find it to be too little too late. To me, it just seems like the glorious end we were promised back when Disney announced the purchase of Star Wars just never materialized, and I feel completely let down by Lucasfilm and Miss Kennedy. I truly hope Rise of Skywalker has some surprises left that might change my view on things, but as of now, I don't even want to go see this movie. Well, I guess time will tell whether I'm overreacting about all this, but I just felt the need to let off some steam about this issue, and I know that you're always good as a listener. Hope I'm not bumming out fellow imagination connoisseurs too much with this long rant, but I needed to let you know how I felt, Rob. Guess this is kind of how you must be feeling about the whole new Star Trek thing, huh? Anyways, thanks for listening, Rob. I'm sure you'll have some wise words of advice for me, and I can't wait to hear them. Long live the Post-Geek Singularity community. P.S. Hashtag Willow Yang for every episode forever. The crusade continues. Exclamation point, exclamation point, exclamation point. No, Willow, I did not forget. Well, Victor, here's the thing. Before I answer you, remember, all of these things are products ultimately of the time in which they were made. And when Star Wars first came out, there was never any thought really that there was ever going to be a sequel. George Lucas was convinced it was going to be a disaster. He didn't know. He went to Hawaii with Steven Spielberg to hang out. He didn't even stick around to enjoy the reading the papers or whatever. And I would say nothing can ever take those originals away from you. I mean, nothing will ever take away from me the fact that I went and saw Empire Strikes Back 26 times in the theater, or that our moderator, Greg Smith, and I stood in line overnight in 1985 to see all three movies for the very first time, projected 9 theaters across North America. The UA 150 theater was one of them. And we got to see all 3 Star Wars films together in the theater. Those are not ever going to be taken away. I don't think the fact that this new Star Wars has bummed you out, I understand, but there's still the old Star Wars movies. They haven't gone anywhere. I just like even Hot Toys figures. I like collecting 12-inch Star Wars figures. I don't have any of the new prequel or sequel trilogy figures. They're all good. I like them all, but I have no reason to buy them. I've even been thinking to myself, do I want to buy Han, Luke, and Leia from the sequel trilogy? Do I want to possess those figures? I mean, I want to as a completist, but I don't need to own them. I even love the prequel trilogy figures. I mean, Count Dooku, what a great character. I don't have that figure yet, but I'll get it. And of course, I have Obi-Wan and Qui-Gon, of course, hasn't come out yet. But I still have all the original Star Treks. I mean, things change and we change. And I think the problem, you have to remember that in Batman Beyond or The Dark Knight, when Harvey Dent says you're the hero long enough until you see yourself becoming the villain. Well, I think that's kind of true of franchises. I mean, when Disney bought Star Wars, they had to make money. If someone lays out $4 billion to buy an IP, got to get paid. Gee, you got to justify that money to your shareholders. You have to, and it's kind of a bummer. And I get where Disney was coming from. I think that unfortunately they were thinking too much like a corporation. What they didn't give us, and what would have. I mean, this is armchair quarterbacking. But when you decide to continue on the Star Wars saga and you're going to bring Han, Luke, Leia, R2, 3PO, Chewie back, the idea that you don't give them one last hurrah is wrong thinking. I get it. Their mandate was probably, we need new characters to take our investment forward another 40 years. But there was no closure. There was no closure, and nothing that they did in Force Awakens. I mean, you went from having an empire to having a first order. It was bizarre. The direction they went in was bizarre. What we should have seen was the rise. We have our characters. They'd grown complacent. 30 years had gone by. The galaxy seemed to be going well. And right within the middle of our midst, again, this evil was rising to power. And yet the first movie should have been our characters were all together going on an adventure. That seems, I don't know why that didn't happen, but look at it this way. We've got the MCU now. We had Lord of the Rings. There's so much good stuff still coming down the pike. I mean, I love The Boys. I never thought I would have seen The Boys as a TV show. We did. They're making the Foundation trilogy, or the trilogy, however many books there are now, and not just Asimov's books, but we're getting Foundation. Denis Villeneuve is making Dune. There's so much cool stuff coming down the pike. I tend to concentrate now on the things that I like. I mean, I might talk about Star Trek is not being the people that are making Star Trek. I've resolved myself to the fact that they don't know how to make Star Trek, and they're turning it into something else. And eventually it will go away. I think ultimately it's going to not work. They're going to suffer from diminishing returns. Everyone looks at Star Trek now as the new CSI. Maybe the Picard show will be good and I can be pleasantly surprised. I certainly can look forward to Picard. I'm certainly looking forward to The Mandalorian. I pre-ordered that figure. I don't have any figures from the sequel or trilogy at all. None. I got none. I got zero. No sequel trilogy figures did I get, but The Mandalorian that comes out in a year, I pre-ordered that figure. That's dope. The Mandalorian show looks like it was made, they weren't constrained by the fact Disney has the pressure is off. Favreau could do this thing. He got to go work with Dave Filoni, who, by the way, lest we not forget, if we love The Mandalorian, I want some people to apologize to Kathleen Kennedy because it was her idea to put Favreau together with Dave Filoni. Let's hope people do that. So don't be depressed. Look, man, the last James Bond movie was bad. Spectre was bad and it was boring. I love James Bond. That does not change my excitement for Bond 25. And you know what? If Bond 25 isn't very good, all right. But, to me, the Daniel Craig movies, Casino Royale was great. Quantum of Solace was less great, but I still enjoyed it. Skyfall, a movie where James Bond fails utterly the entire movie. Spectre, where James Bond put me to sleep and Blofeld's an incompetent boob. And then hopefully Bond 25 will restore the luster to the franchise. But I still have all the old Bond movies I can throw in, from Russia with Love whenever I want. I can always throw in. What's amazing is how much I enjoy those classic Star Wars movies when I watch them. Star Wars, Empire, and, well, to a certain extent, Return of the Jedi. Even now, I've gotten over it. I can still, for Jedi, I zip through it. I watch the last space battle. And you know what? We got Rogue One. There's a lot of Rogue One I like. I love the space battle at the end of that, too. And I like the fact that they allowed that movie to end with everybody dying. So don't be depressed. We got 7 weeks of Star Wars coming up. Get excited for that. Find your inner child. Go find your smile like in City Slickers, man. We got The Mandalorian coming. After you watched that trailer last night, you can't tell me that you weren't a little stoked to see that. That Mandalorian, he walks out and blows that point blank range, shoots a stormtrooper in the face, brah. Come on. I want to see that. And you should too. Anyway, it's a lifestyle choice. You have to choose your happiness. And with that, ladies and gentlemen, I am bringing an end to this episode number 263 of Robservations. I want to thank, first of all my moderators for being here. Lewis Yu, I got to thank Jody54, Jody Lyons, our two new moderators. Detective Jim Boyers, Greg Smith, who makes, by the way, a mean Doctor Strange. I thought he only cosplayed Star Wars characters, but was I wrong? And does he make a good Stephen Strange? I want to thank Terry, the Sheriff of Nottingham, and the Honorable Mayor Mike Bodden, who's fighting for his life. I want to thank everybody who sends me letters, the Burnettwork.net, burning up. Mike Bodden is also updating that website, so there's more letters there. You can go. If I haven't read your letter yet, it's a good bet you'll find it up there. Ali State's new column is going to drop this week, I promise, and I promise her. That would be the Feminerd Gaze. That's going to be a new weekly column on the Burnettwork. Going to check that out. Anyway, I want to thank all my new subscribers. If you like this channel, please hit like, please subscribe, please hit the little notification bell. I will be back on the John Campea show tomorrow, and then I will be back here in the afternoon. Hopefully something will break, some interesting topic. I don't know. Maybe I'll just sit here and build a model kit that I have over here because I got a few to build. I got an Eagle Transporter. I got a Katinga. I got my EVA pod. I got my Discovery. I've even got my little version of the C57D from Forbidden Planet that has a motor in it and it lights up. Maybe I'll build that. I don't know. I don't think you guys would want to watch me build a model, but I could. So anyway, remember, every person you meet has a story to tell. You have yet to hear. All you have to do is listen. By the way, on that topic, I had somebody tell me that they unsubscribed to this channel because I went on Geeks and Gamers and had a conversation with Jeremy. I just have to say, I am not Jeremy's keeper. My point in going on the show with him was to show that we, first and foremost, are fans. I thought we had a delightful conversation. And we did. We geeked out. We talked about video games, classic video games. And I don't necessarily think that has to be a bad thing. I think that all fans can find common ground and talk to each other. And I think we should talk to each other more. And the mandate of my channel, my mission statement, as it were, is, to have fandom talk to each other, enjoy each other's company. Let's talk about things that we love. First and foremost, we're fans. We are. We're very passionate fans. And I think that if we can't talk to each other, where are we at? I mean, what is the internet if not to converse with one another? I mean, sure, it's also to really share your hatred of Star Trek Discovery. No, I'm kidding. Sort of. Anyway, so I'll say it one more time. Every person you meet has a story to tell you have yet to hear. All you have to do is listen. And with that, I say, this brings an end to Robservations, the show about something. Robservations live chat number 263, closing in, ladies and gentlemen, closing in on episode 300. It's going to be I got a plan for episode 300. It's got to be a big one. Maybe I'll be on for 300 minutes or something, and maybe I'll figure out how to get live Skype. People can call me. Maybe it'll be a live show, or I'll figure out how people can come in via Skype, and I could do that with Wirecast. I could set up if you guys want to Skype in, maybe like give everybody 10 minutes if you want. We could do something like that. Who knows? Anyway, I'm thinking all about it. Remember, and I hope that everybody has a better day.